Well, it's great to be here. Great to have a chance to talk about the .NET 5 SDK. We've been working on this for a while. I'm pretty excited to share it. And so before we get started, how are you doing today? Rainer, is this a good day?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I've got some chili in the kitchen, and I'm excited about eating that later, and I'm excited about sharing this with y'all now. How are
All
you doing,
right.
Catherine?
It's pizza night here, so I got a pizza order that's going to be getting called in for me sometime a little bit later this afternoon. So it's all good. All right, let's get going. So the .NET 5 SDK it's the next generation of our tooling around .NET. We dropped the word core, so it's just now the .NET 5 SDK. We dropped the name .NET, the name core everywhere. So.
And the SDK is a set of things that includes the tools you need to build your applications, like MS Build, NuGet, the Roslyn and F# compilers, and other tools that you need to build all that stuff all in one convenient package or place.
And you get to all that through the .NET CLI, which is also part of the SDK. And that lets you do commands on the command line. You can say things like .NET new for create, .NET build, .NET pack, .NET publish, etc. And so you can do all of your tooling things on the command line, which even if you're a Visual Studio user, you may want to do for your build pipeline. So that's what the SDK is all about. There's a tool ecosystem as well, but we're not going to be talking too much about that today. Just one feature relates to that. So one of the things about the .NET SDK is that we release quarterly, where the .NET runtime and what you think of as .NET releases yearly. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The big one is that tooling moves faster than the runtime. In general, tooling just moves fast. And we also coincide with Visual Studio releases because they're one of the venues for using the SDK. So with quarterly releases, if you're in Visual Studio, then Visual Studio is going to take care of all your updates for you. Just go ahead and update Visual Studio. You'll be updating the SDK. But if you're not in Visual Studio, then you'll need to download and update that yourself. And this is the link, Microsoft.com, download .NET Core. And that's a rather complex web page, but if you look at the top of it, that's going to show you the most recent releases. And so scrolling down through there, you'll see a lot because we keep all of the releases we've done available on that page. One of the things about this, though, is it's great because you get things fast. The downside of it, though, is that we wind up with a rather odd set of version numbers. And so the first two digits are related to the runtime. And this shows you the highest runtime that this SDK can target. So the 5.0.100 SDK can target 5.0, 3.1, 2.1, 2.0, even out of support things. So any previous version of the runtime, you can write an application that targets that, and you can build it with the latest SDK. The second part is that we do want to tell you when we do quarterly updates and you have new features. We don't want that to be a surprise. And so the first position of the patch is what we call a feature band, and that comes out every time we update, which is quarterly. When that comes up, then we increment that number. So today we're releasing 5.0.100, and in February we're going to release 5.0.200. And finally, we end this with a patch number at the end there. So one of the things we changed here is target framework monikers. And there's a really good question to ask us on this, which is why do we take a new approach to the target framework moniker, TFM, which is how you specify the framework that you want your application to target. So Rainer, why do we do this?
Yeah, so there's a few different reasons, and we'll go over them. The target framework is one of the few things that you have to specify in a modern .NET project, and that's because it's very central to the experience of developing a .NET application. The target framework defines the base set of APIs that are available to you to use in your code. So if you say that you want to target the .NET 5.0 framework, that gives you support for all the great .NET 5 APIs that we're spending a bunch of time and effort talking about today. One thing that you might notice if you're used to authoring applications for .NET Core is that the target framework used to be .NET Core App 3.1 or .NET Core App 2.0, and now it's just .NET 5.0. As Kathleen mentioned, we're dropping the core from the name. For the most part, you want to target .NET 5.0, and that kind of replaces that .NET Standard 2.0 or 2.1 targeting that was fairly common for libraries, unless you need your library to work on .NET Framework as well as .NET Core and .NET 5. We've augmented target frameworks in .NET 5 with the ability to specify not just the .NET version, but also a platform and a platform version. And that lets you specify that your project targets Windows, or in future releases of .NET, targets Android, targets iOS, and it allows you to have a single project that multi-targets to multiple platforms.
So do you have some examples of some of this? Because these numbers, I mean, I'm imagining this, but what do these numbers actually look like? What do these TFMs look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So you might say target framework .NET 5.0, and that means that you get access to all the great .NET 5 APIs and that you'll run anywhere .NET 5 runs. But sometimes you want to write parts of an application that need OS support. Like, for example, UI applications. If you specify that you want to run on .NET 5.0-Windows, that means you get access to Windows-only APIs, and that means that you can, for example, write a WinForms app or a WPF app. You can even go further than that. You can say .NET 5.0-Windows 10.0.19041. You put that Windows version number in there, and that means that you can access not just APIs that are available on Windows, but modern APIs that were added in Windows 10.
All right, that makes sense. So what if I want a range of I want to cover a range of different operating system versions?
Absolutely. So we have the concept of the target framework. So, and here's an example project. This targets, again, that Windows 10 19041. But it also has a supported OS platform property defined that says Windows 7. And what this project file means is this application will run on any Windows 7 and newer. But where I get the chance, I'm going to use Windows 10 functionality. And setting this up means that you have to make a promise that you're not going to call those Windows 10 APIs when you're on Windows 7. You can do that with runtime checks, and you need to say, if I'm on Windows or if I'm on a new enough version of Windows, then I can call these fancy new Windows 10 APIs. Of course, remembering to do that can be a bit of a hassle. If you see an API, you might want to use it. You might not always be thinking, oh, wait a second, what about the small percentage of my customers that are on older versions of Windows?
Let's take a look at what that looks. Let's see what that looks like.
Yeah, so let's do it. Let's see. Here's a Visual Studio project. Here I'm calling a Windows-only API. Linux and macOS don't have this concept of apartment state. And you can see I get a nice green squiggle, and I get a warning that says set apartment state is supported on Windows. And that means that I need to add a guard to the call to this to make sure that it is called only when we're on Windows. And fortunately, there's a very straightforward way to do that. If operating system is Windows, then you can call those APIs. There are other classes that, there are other methods that have version checks embedded as well.
Great.
The other thing that putting the platform in the target framework enables is now we can have a single SDK to do all kinds of applications. So that means you have Microsoft.NET.SDK. And in the past, when you had a UI application, you had to use Microsoft.NET.SDK.Windows Desktop. That's no longer the case.
Right.
That's part of what enables us to have multi-targeting for a single project that has more than one target platform.
All right, I see how that lays the groundwork for the future. When we have multiple platforms, part of one.NET means that we don't know what you're going to be targeting, and we don't want to go to the least common denominator. We want to give you the best of the platforms that you're on, except we have to help you get there. And so if you're using a combination of Android and iOS, you're also going to get the same kind of warnings that said you haven't guarded here. We're worried you're going to crash at runtime, because it would be a runtime crash if you encounter one of these APIs that's not supported on the platform you're running on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. What else do we have? CLI features themselves. All right. So we have a couple of things here. The .NET New is faster. It slowed down a little bit in some recent versions, and we are working on that. It's not completely back to where we want it to be, but it will be much faster almost all the time. You occasionally see a little slowdown, but that's coming up. And also, we used to have, prior to 5.0, and we're still in process of making this change, CLI templates and Visual Studio templates were different. And they were different in how they were installed on your machine. So what we're doing it'll be fully live, we think, in either Visual Studio 16.9 or 16.10, going into preview right now in 16.8, is the ability to take the templates you install in the CLI and display them in Visual Studio.
So when you get Visual Studio 16.8, open up those preview features settings and check that box.
And you'll get them. That's all it takes. And if you want to comment on the experience, please feel free. It's definitely a preview. We're definitely looking for feedback on that entire experience. We're working out the rough spots. So we also have something called install scripts. So the .NET install scripts are Bash and PowerShell scripts that allow you to go to a bare machine with nothing on it and put on the runtime and the SDK, usually non-admin, usually locally. And the most common reason for that is to be able to run CI/CD and set up that machine and do it all very automatically. But these need a little bit of attention. So we've done some work both to fix bugs and then to make them more reliable by adding monitors. So we now ping them and say, hey, are you there? Are you there? And the goal is that we find out if there's a problem, do some automatic restarts and things. So we're hoping that the reliability of those endpoints goes way up, and that you are not still seeing problems with them being down and us finding out because somebody says, hey, your site is down. And so it was something we should have already done, but we've got it done now, and that should be much more reliable. And the last thing we're going to talk about today is .NET Tool Search, which is a great new feature if you want to use .NET tools. So it's .NET Tool Search, and then why don't we look for any framework, and then let's just hit enter and see what it displays. So you can see we have the package IDs that have EF in them. We have the version that's available. We have the author, and we have the number of downloads. So you can see that we have 2.5 million of the Microsoft main entity framework tools, and then we have several other tools that people have out there, allowing you to pretty easily find the one you're looking for. Few other features here. If we do .NET Tool Search -H or --help would be the same. You can see that we have a detail. I'll warn you, there's a lot of detail there, including every version and how many downloads of each version. But one of the important things it has there is it does indicate whether the author is verified. So NuGet has a system by which certain authors, including Microsoft, but not only Microsoft, others as well, have gone through paperwork to ensure that if you see something is authored by Microsoft, it is actually from Microsoft. So detail gives you a lot of information, and then pre-release is also important. So you can find the pre-release packages. So that's the .NET Tool Search feature. Within the CLI, list means show me what's currently installed on my machine. Search means show me what's out there and available to me. And we hope to add better search capabilities across several things inside the CLI going forward in the next few releases. So are we ready to talk about MS Build?
I'm ready, always.
Right.
So MS Build 16.8 is the version that's shipping with .NET Core or .NET 5.0, and it's also shipping with Visual Studio 16.8. And we've got a great smattering of bug fixes and performance improvements, as the cool kids say, and also some new features that we can talk about. One of them is that we now support the Visual Studio solution filter concept. This is a way where you can load a subset of a big solution that represents the projects that you are more interested in working on. And it can be faster to load in Visual Studio, and it can also be faster to build when you build only the subset that you care about. MSBuild.exe on the command line now supports building .slnf files as well as .sln and proj files.
And what about .NET Build? So you said MS Build. What about .NET Build?
.NET Build is a wrapper around MS Build, and it has this same capability, just the same.
All right, great.
Another thing that we're introducing in MS Build 16.8 is the concept of change waves. Build is a very complex space, and there's a lot of dark corners where things can go wrong. We want to be able to make changes to improve things for the vast majority of users, but sometimes we run into situations where we can imagine that someone with a heavily customized build environment might have a problem with a change that we want to make. A change wave will give you the ability to turn back the clock on some of those changes so that you have time to file feedback and make sure that we know that it's more impactful than we hoped it would be, and potentially adjust the way that you're customizing your build so that we can move forward and deliver those improvements to everyone. A little more information about that available at aka.ms/msbuild/changewaves.
So this is not going to affect a ton of people. Most people will not be affected by this, but the people that need this really need it. And so we'll be using this going forward. This is the first release that we've got this in, and we'll be tweaking it and better understanding it as we move forward.
Absolutely. Another set of features that we've added in MS Build is target framework property functions. It is common in project files and build logic to need to condition something like a package reference or some build customization on the target framework of the project that is currently building. In the past, that was done one way. We've now made it a little easier. I'll go ahead and blow it up here. We now have this function is target framework compatible, and you can specify the input as the target framework, for example, of the current project, and then what you want it to be compatible with. So here we're saying, is the current project compatible with .NET 5.0?
Okay. It looks like .NET Bot's has got a tip for you there.
Absolutely. Historically, people would often have conditions that did exact string matches on target frameworks, or tried to be more generic and search for .NET Core App. Since .NET Core App is no longer the target framework that we're targeting, you may need to update that logic to use the is target framework compatible function so that you can be future-proof and support .NET 5.0 and future. One other thing I'll mention is .NET 6.0-iOS is going to be compatible with .NET 5.0. So this is a great way to say is 5.0 and higher.
Right. Okay. That sounds great. All right. So what else do we have? You said you were going to show us some bin logs, didn't you?
I did. Binary logging is a feature that we've had in MS Build for a while now, but it's something that I want to evangelize at every opportunity. So I'm evangelizing to y'all now. The build is very complex. It's very big, and it can be hard to understand exactly why something is going wrong when you've got a red build, or worse, when you have a build that succeeded but didn't produce exactly the outputs that you wanted to understand. Historically, you would have giant text logs with maybe millions of lines and potentially many different processes interleaved with each other. It was potentially really hard to understand what was going on. It would be great if we had a structured way to store that logging and then look at it later. And binary logs are that thing. You can find a ton of information, including some warnings about the contents at aka.ms/msbuild/binlog. And I'd like to show you today some new technology that an intern on our team put together using the latest and greatest in .NET, using Blazor and WebAssembly to run .NET code in your browser to have a nice UI for those binary logs on your local computer. So first, let's talk about capturing a bin log. All you need to do is add -bl to your build command. So let's do .NET build, and let's build my solution filter here, and then say -bl. We'll see the usual build scroll, and I'll see a couple of warnings here. We'll drill in on those in a bit. And then we also produce this MS build .binlog file.
All right.
So we can see that. And if we open up a browser tab to live.msbuildlog.com, then we can just drag and drop this bin log. Now, because we're using Blazor WebAssembly, this is happening locally. You're not uploading that binary log, so you don't have to worry about exposing the kind of secrets that you may have in your log. Like, for example, a lot of build environments include tokens or authentication environments or passwords as environment variables. So if you capture from your continuous deployment environment, you might accidentally expose those things in the environment variables that are logged in the bin log. So you may not want to share those broadly outside your team. Let's look around at some of the other features of the bin log viewer. Up here, we have a file tab. Embedded in that binary log is all of the build logic that was used to build whatever the build was, including things from the SDK and including the actual projects that you were building and including files that got imported, like this directory.build.targets file that got automatically imported because I put it in a folder above my projects. You'll note that the contents of your build logic and even the file names of your projects may have secrets. If you send me a bin log that has deathray.csproj in it, then I may know something about your plans for the weekend. There's lots of other information that you can find in the bin log. With those embedded files, we've got a Find in Files tab that allows you to search. And we've got a search that searches through the logical log. So you might want to search for a type of thing like a warning. And here you see this warning, and this particular warning is that it's no longer necessary to use the Windows Desktop SDK. We talked about that. For this example, I did not remove that. And here's another warning that's coming this time from the C# compiler that says set apartment state is supported on Windows, so we should guard it. I built this before I added those guards in the previous segment. Also in the binary log, you can see information about all these targets and things like here we're in the CSC task, that's the C# compiler task, and we can see all of the parameters passed to that. Here are the references that were passed. Here are the source files that were passed, and so on. And that's a really powerful debugging tool that keeps all that information together and helps you understand where all that stuff is for when you're trying to debug through a tricky build problem.
Awesome.
And of course, the first people we showed this to, they said, that looks great, but it needs a feature. So yes, it does have a dark mode.
Dark mode.
And so I'd like to really give a shout out to the binary log viewer project. There's also a Windows application as well as this live version. And Kirill Osenkov is driving that open source project, and it is a great tool to understand and explore your build.
Right, both of these approaches to it, both the Windows version, if you're on Windows, and then if you're not, the web version, which will handle everything cross-platform.
That's right.
And with that, are we ready for questions?
I believe we are.
All right, so Chris is going to jump back in here and help us out with any questions we've got.
Absolutely. Thank you guys very much. That was a really good session. Lots of super good information. We'll go ahead and jump into the questions. Before we do, I want to remind everybody, keep hitting us up with your questions. Hit the .NET Conf hashtag. And then, as a reminder, any question that we read, everybody's going to be getting, those folks will be getting a gift card for using the .NET Foundation. So I just want to remind everybody, keep doing that. Lots of good questions coming in, and we will go ahead and get started. So, first one from Sridhar. Can we expect command line auto-completion for the .NET CLI?
Yes, and you actually have it today. We're just trying to figure out how we can raise it so you can find it easier. We've worked a lot on the SEO on this. Any combination of tab completion, I haven't tried auto completion, but tab completion, .NET, keep going, you're going to find it, .NET CLI. There's a page that gives you the scripts that you need to put in to the problem is it's shell specific. So we have a hard time setting this up for you because we have to actually get something into your shell startup. And that is a hard thing for us to do. We haven't cracked that problem yet. We have tab completion except for templates, and we're working on templates. So when you say .NET New, that has tab completion, but once you have the name of the template, you don't have tab completion after that. But yes, great question. And we're working on making it better, but we do have it.
Super. All right. We got a couple more minutes, so we'll keep going with a few more questions. This one from Dastan. Is it possible to compile projects with target frameworks Net 4 without installing the Windows SDK and VS?
Hey, great question. Commonly asked, and the answer finally is yes, absolutely. The .NET SDK will now detect if you're targeting a .NET 4 application, and will dynamically add a package reference to the reference assemblies for .NET 4 and higher, and allow you to build that even on a Linux or a Mac environment where you don't have access to the .NET 4 SDK.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, just a little bit more time. So another question for you. You guys covered a bunch of stuff with MS Build, and you covered a bunch of the great features. Is there what feature, either A, that you didn't cover today that you want customers to know about, or B, is there any feature that you think their customers are going to be the most surprised, are going to be the most super beneficial when they crack open .NET 5 this week and start get building projects?
I think the biggest thing that I would want people to know about MS Build is it's not just you. The build really is complex and hard, and you have to deal with a bunch of complexity there. And the reason I talked about bin logs, even though they're not a brand new feature in this talk, is because I really think they're a great tool, especially in combination with the viewer, to figure out and explore your build, and also to share and ask questions with your teammates, or if you need to file bugs on us or on SDK authors. A great way to get that information in a nice format.
Yeah, I just want to build a tiny bit on that, because we say that and then a lot of people are going, I've never thought about my build. Why do I think about my build? And if you're in Visual Studio and you just build and that works for you, then the complexity is hidden in what's called common tasks and targets. And so there is a lot of complexity, and if you open a bin log, a lot is going on. It's tucked away in these common tasks and targets. And it's actually the ability to customize tasks and targets like those that is what sometimes gets into that space where we have a hard time not actually stepping on toes and doing breaking changes in that space. So if you've never thought about your build, you're in good company. There's a huge number of people that have never had to think about their build. But when you do have to think about it, then what the complexity is coming from a combination of SDKs and even NuGet packages that are adding to this pipeline, this build pipeline of all these tasks and targets that are running to go from your code to output. An example is Roslyn. So the CSC compiler is one of the things that lands in a build task there.
All right, we'll get one last quick question in here.
Right.
We really appreciate the faster. Oh, sorry. I know Kung Fu says, I really appreciate the faster .NET New. It's a really great presentation, but we need the Rainier's chili recipe. Can you share it? Can you tweet it out?
I will tweet out my chili recipe. I make a former world champion recipe that I've added my own tweaks to. I don't have my tweaks written down, but I can give you the base recipe, which I think is a great one. And I'm from Texas, so I like to think that means I can have a good opinion about chili.
That's awesome. All right, Kathleen Rainier, thanks a lot for your talk today. Thanks for spending some time with us answering some questions.